Captain Lee Hyon stood on the bridge of the UES Baekdu and watched the stars change for the first time in 127 years. The massive ship had been traveling through the dark between stars since before he was born. His grandfather had seen Earth fade away into nothing. His father had lived his whole life in the metal corridors and spinning sections of humanity's first and only home among the stars. Now Lee Hyon was the one who would see their new home. The Baekdu was not like the sleek ships in old Earth movies. It was a monster of metal and purpose. 47 kilometers from nose to tail. 2.3 million humans lived inside its spinning rings and cylinder sections. Mining equipment hung from its sides like the teeth of some great beast. Heat radiators stretched out like wings that could cover a small moon. Cargo bays big enough to hold entire cities jutted from its hull. Point defense guns covered every surface to shoot down the rocks and ice that tried to kill them in the empty dark. Science Officer Park Mina called out from her station. The sensors were picking up something new, something that should not be there. Lee Hyon moved to her screen and saw what had made her voice tight with worry. Ships, dozens of them. Small and fast and clearly built by someone who was not human. Park Mina ran the numbers again and again. The ships were real. They moved with purpose and intelligence. They had found the Kepler 442 system after more than a century of travel, and it was already home to someone else. The first contact protocols that had been written by people long dead suddenly became very important. Communications specialist Kim Day was already working to intercept the alien signals. The unknown ships were talking to each other in bursts of organized mathematics, numbers and patterns that spoke of intelligence and civilization. Kim Day fed the signals through every program the Baekdu carried. Slowly, the computer began to find meaning in the alien words. They were trying to talk. The signals followed patterns that looked like peaceful contact attempts, mathematical sequences that any intelligent species would recognize, prime numbers, simple equations, the universal language of mathematics that Earth's scientists had always hoped would let different species understand each other. But something was wrong. The alien ships were not coming closer. They were forming up in formation around the Baekdu, like they expected a fight. Long-range sensors showed more ships moving toward them from deeper in the system. Big ships with weapon signatures that made the Baekdu's point defense guns look like toys. Fleet Commander Thys of the Velthari Confederacy stared at his main screen and tried to understand what he was seeing. His people had shared the Kepler 442 system with 5 other species for more than 2,000 years. They had built a peaceful confederation of worlds and stations and asteroid colonies. They had fought off pirates and solved problems through talk and trade. But they had never seen anything like the thing that had just appeared at the edge of their space. It was massive beyond any ship in Velthari records. The computer called it a mobile weapons platform. A fortress built for war and conquest. Weapons covered its hull like scales on a predator. The heat signature showed power plants that could run a dozen worlds. Manufacturing signatures suggested it could build fleets of ships while traveling between stars. Thys had commanded fleets for 40 years. He had seen Corvani battlecruisers and Xerian dreadnoughts. He had fought against pirate armadas and criminal cartels. But he had never seen anything that radiated such casual and overwhelming threat. This was not a ship. This was a mobile world, built for destroying other worlds. The alien vessel had appeared without warning from the deep dark between stars. It moved with the slow certainty of something too powerful to fear anything else. Its communications were mathematical sequences that his translators recognized as contact protocols. But the ship itself screamed of violence and invasion. This opened a channel to Velthari Command. Admiral Nareth needed to know that their peaceful system was about to become a battlefield. The mathematical messages might be asking for peaceful contact, but the ship that carried them was clearly built for war. On the Baekdu, Captain Lee Hyon watched the alien fleet grow larger on his screens. Engineer Yun Tae reported from the machine shops deep in the ship's hull. The long journey had been hard on their systems. Mining equipment needed repair. Hull sections showed stress fractures from more than a century of acceleration and deceleration. The great ship looked fierce to outside eyes, but it was held together with patches and prayer and the skill of engineers who had learned to fix anything with whatever they could find. Communications. Specialist Kim Day finally made a breakthrough with the alien language. The mathematical signals were definitely peaceful contact attempts, but the aliens were also broadcasting warnings to something they called the Confederacy. They were afraid. The translation programs were still rough, but the meaning was clear. The aliens thought the Bayek-Du was a threat. Park Mina ran deep scans of the alien ships and found them beautiful in their design. Sleek hulls that cut through space like knives, weapons that were elegant and precise. Ships built by people who had never had to choose between beauty and survival. The aliens had built their vessels to be perfect. Humans had built the Bayek-Du to keep their species alive. The cultural differences showed in every line and curve. Alien ships were smooth and clean and purpose-built for single functions. The Bayek-Du was a collection of parts and additions and modifications that had grown over more than a century of travel. What the aliens saw as weapons were tools that had kept humanity alive in the dark between stars. Admiral Cho Il-Sol joined, Lee Hyon on the bridge as the situation became more tense. She commanded the Bayek-Du's military forces, such as they were, security troops and police who had kept order during the long journey. Point defense crews who had shot rocks and ice chunks that threatened the hull. Engineers who could turn mining equipment into weapons if they had to. But they were not an invasion force. They were refugees with the tools they needed to survive. The alien fleet was now close enough for visual contact. Kim Day managed to establish a crude translation link. The aliens called themselves the Velthari Confederacy. They wanted to know why humanity had sent a war machine into their peaceful system. They were demanding that the Bayek-Du leave immediately, or face the combined fleets of 6 different species. Lee Hyon found himself in the position that no human had ever faced before. He was about to become humanity's first ambassador to an alien civilization. The words he chose in the next few hours would decide whether the human species found a new home among the stars or died fighting for survival against enemies they had never wanted to make. The Bayek-Du continued its slow approach toward the inner system where planets waited with the promise of solid ground and open skies. Around it, the Velthari fleet grew larger and more threatening with each passing hour. 2 species were about to meet for the first time. One side saw refugees seeking shelter. The other side saw invaders bringing war in the space between stars and planets. First contact was about to begin with fear and misunderstanding and the shadow of violence that neither side truly wanted. The monster ship that carried humanity's dreams moved forward into an uncertain future where every decision could mean the difference between peace and war. Admiral Cho Il-Sol watched the Velthari ships hold their formation around the Bayek-Du and knew that one wrong move would start a war that nobody wanted. The alien vessels stayed just outside weapons range, but their intent was clear. They were ready to fight if the massive human ship made any aggressive moves. The problem was that everything about the Bayek-Du looked aggressive to eyes that had never seen a generation ship. Chief Engineer Yun Tai worked in the deep sections of the ship where the real work happened. His teams crawled through maintenance, tunnels and repair bays that had not stopped working for 127 years. The Bayek-Du was held together by skill and determination and spare parts cannibalized from systems that were no longer critical. Every surface was covered with patches and welds and modifications that had been added during the long journey between stars. What the Velthari saw as weapon systems were actually the tools that had kept humanity alive in the void. The massive, mining lasers that looked so threatening were designed to cut up asteroids for raw materials. The huge cargo bays that seemed like invasion craft storage were filled with equipment and supplies needed for building a new civilization. The point defense grid that appeared to be ship-killing weapons were meteor shields that had saved the Bayek-Du from destruction thousands of times. Linguist Dr. Bei Su worked with communications specialist Kim Day to break through the language barrier. That was making everything worse. The Velthari had translation technology, but it was designed for species that thought like they did. Human concepts and human ways of speaking did not translate well into their mathematical precision. What humans meant as peaceful requests came across as demands. What humans saw as explanations sounded like threats. The breakthrough came when Dr. Bei Su realized that the Velthari thought in terms of individual ships with specific purposes. They could not understand how one vessel could be a transport and a factory and a weapons platform and a city all at the same time. To them, the Bayek-Du was impossible. It broke all their rules about how spaceships should work. Medical Chief Han Wu was monitoring the communications when he heard something that changed everything. The Velthari were dealing with a plague that was killing members of one of their allied species. Their medical technology was advanced, but they had never seen anything like this disease. It was spreading through their populations faster than they could develop treatments. Han Wu brought the information to Captain Li Haiyan immediately. Here was a chance to show the aliens that humanity had come in peace. Human medical knowledge was different from anything the Velthari had seen. Earth had survived plagues and diseases that had killed billions. The medical databases on the Baekdu contained treatments and cures that might save alien lives. Li Haiyan made the decision that would define first contact between the species. He ordered Han Wu to prepare a complete medical data package and transmit it to the Velthari fleet. No conditions, no demands for payment or alliance. Just freely given knowledge that might help save lives. It was the most human thing they could do. The transmission included everything. Detailed information about human immune systems, descriptions of diseases that Earth had conquered, treatment protocols that had been developed over thousands of years of human medicine. Most importantly, it included the concept of vaccination and how to teach immune systems to fight diseases they had never encountered. Velthari counselor Nerith received the medical data and could not understand what she was seeing. The humans had given them knowledge that was worth more than entire star systems, medical technology that could save millions of lives, and they had asked for nothing in return. It was unprecedented in galactic history. The medical data proved that the humans were not the simple warlike species that their ship suggested. The complexity of their knowledge spoke of a civilization that had survived terrible challenges. The generosity of sharing it freely spoke of people who valued life above conquest. For the first time since the monster ship had appeared, some Velthari began to wonder if they had been wrong about human intentions. But not everyone was convinced. Security Director Quan Boa detected ships moving in the outer system that did not belong to the main Velthari fleet. Long-range sensors identified them as vessels from the Corvani faction. The Corvani were the military arm of the Confederacy, and they believed that strength was the only language that mattered in a dangerous galaxy. The Corvani war chief Drac had seen the specifications of the human ship and reached a different conclusion than the peaceful Velthari. To him, the Baekdu proved that humanity was a warrior species that had built the ultimate weapon. The medical knowledge they had shared was just a trick to make the Confederacy lower their guard. Drac was preparing to strike before the humans could reveal their true intentions. Dr. Bei Su finally managed to establish real communication with Velthari linguists. The breakthrough came when she realized that the aliens had never experienced the concept of a generation ship. Their fastest vessels could cross their local space in months. They had never imagined a species that would lock themselves in a metal box for more than a century just to reach another star. When the Velthari learned the true nature of the Baekdu, everything began to change. The massive ship was not a weapons platform. It was an ark, a desperate attempt to save an entire species from a dying world. Every frightening system had a peaceful purpose. Every weapon was actually a tool. Every threatening aspect was actually a survival necessity. Park Mina shared the sensor logs from their long journey, data that showed how the mining lasers had been used to harvest ice and rock from comets, records of how the point defense system had destroyed meteors and debris that would have killed everyone aboard, maintenance reports that showed how the modular construction had allowed them to repair and replace systems that failed during the long darkness between stars. The story of Earth's death was the key to understanding humanity's nature. The sun had begun its expansion into a red giant earlier than predicted. Earth had centuries to prepare, but no way to save their world. Some humans had wanted to build small, fast ships for the elite. Others had insisted that they save everyone, or save no one. The Baekdu was the result of choosing to save everyone. Engineer Yun Tai transmitted construction logs that showed how the great ship had been built, not as a single vessel, but as a growing organism that added new sections and capabilities as needed. Manufacturing bays that had started as simple factories had evolved into systems that could build anything humanity needed. The ship had grown and changed during its journey like a living thing adapting to survive. Velthari Admiral Theiss found himself faced with a reality that challenged everything. He thought he knew about warfare and survival. The humans had not built a ship to conquer others. They had built a ship to save themselves. But in doing so, they had created something that was more powerful than any weapon the Confederacy possessed. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Humanity's desperate attempt to preserve their species had accidentally created the most fearsome vessel in known space. Their tools of survival could easily become tools of conquest if they chose to use them that way. The fact that they had chosen to share medical knowledge instead of making demands proved that they understood the responsibility that came with such power. Communication channels buzzed with debate among the 6 species of the Confederacy. Some, like Counselor Nerith, argued that humanity should be welcomed as refugees in need of help. Others, like War Chief Drac, insisted that any species capable of building the Baekdu was too dangerous to trust. The decision would affect not just first contact, but the future of both civilizations. Captain Li Haiyan waited for an answer while his people worked to repair their ancient ship and prepare for whatever came next. They had traveled more than a century to reach this moment. The next few hours would determine whether humanity found a new home among the stars or became the monsters that the galaxy feared they might be. Galactic Intelligence Operative Vex transmitted his report through the quantum relay network that connected dozens of civilizations across the local arm of the galaxy. The message was simple but terrifying. A new species had appeared with technology that made them the most dangerous force in known space. Within hours, every major power from the hegemony to the trade councils had received detailed specifications of humanity's monster ship. The descriptions spread like wildfire through diplomatic channels and military networks. A species that built mobile worlds capable of destroying entire fleets, beings who carried their entire civilization in weapons platforms that could manufacture unlimited numbers of war machines. The technical specifications were clear. The humans had created something that no existing fleet could hope to defeat in direct combat. Captain Li Haiyan found himself reluctantly famous across dozens of star systems as recordings of the Baekdu were analyzed by alien military experts. What humans saw as practical engineering solutions looked like nightmare weapons to species that had never faced extinction. The mining equipment that had saved humanity during their long journey was reinterpreted as planet-killing devices. The manufacturing systems that made their survival possible were seen as invasion preparation facilities. Ambassador Song Jia attempted her first diplomatic contact with representatives of nearby civilizations. The responses were immediate and uniformly fearful. Species that had never heard of humans before were already discussing defensive alliances against the threat they represented. The reputation of the monster ship had traveled faster than any actual contact could be made. The Zeridian Empire sent a formal warning through Velthari channels. Any approach by the human vessel toward their territory would be considered an act of war. The Crystal Collective began moving their fleet assets to border positions. The nomad clans started relocating their mobile cities away from any vector the Baekdu might follow. Fear was spreading faster than understanding. What made the situation worse was that humanity's practical approach to engineering looked insane to species that built specialized vessels for specific purposes. The concept of one ship that could mine asteroids and manufacture equipment and fight battles and house millions of people was beyond their experience. To them, it looked like humanity had solved every possible space travel challenge and then weaponized the solutions. The reputation grew with each retelling. Intelligence reports described self-repairing hull systems that could consume entire asteroids for raw materials, population centers that could survive direct hits from capital ship weapons, manufacturing capabilities that could produce unlimited numbers of war machines, modular design that allowed rapid reconfiguration for any conceivable purpose, including total warfare. Pirate Lord Drast received the intelligence reports with interest rather than fear. He commanded a fleet of raiders that had grown rich by attacking isolated colonies and merchant convoys. The descriptions of human technology suggested opportunities rather than threats. If the humans were as powerful as the reports claimed, then defeating them would prove his superiority to the galaxy. The opportunity came when Drast received a distress call from a Velthari mining colony that was under attack from his advanced scouts. Standard pirate tactics called for overwhelming force against weak defenders, but this time the colony had sent out a call for help that the Baekdu had answered. Drast saw his chance to test human capabilities in actual combat. Tactical Officer. Nam Gil coordinated the response from the Bekdu's command center. The pirate fleet was approaching the mining colony with obvious hostile intent. Standard defensive protocols required protecting civilian lives and property. What the pirates did not understand was that humanity's idea of defensive action was very different from what other species considered normal. The engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes from first contact to complete pirate fleet destruction. Nam Gil used mining equipment and cargo handling systems and point defense networks in ways that no military strategist had ever imagined. What the pirates saw as a merchant vessel's defensive guns were actually industrial systems designed to handle million-ton asteroids and process them into useful materials. The cargo haulers that launched from the Bekdu were not supply ships. They were mobile factories equipped with fabrication systems that could build defensive drones in real time during combat. The mining lasers that cut through pirate hulls like paper were precision instruments designed for asteroid processing. The ramming attacks that destroyed entire pirate squadrons were standard cargo handling maneuvers adapted for combat use. War correspondent Zenth broadcast the footage across multiple star systems with commentary that made human capabilities sound even more terrifying than they actually were. The broadcast showed what appeared to be a factory ship that could build unlimited numbers of war machines during active combat. The pirates' advanced warships had been destroyed by mining equipment and cargo handlers operating as improvised weapons of mass destruction. The galaxy watched the footage and reached the obvious conclusion. Humanity had not deployed military forces against the pirates. They had deployed industrial capacity that treated warships like raw materials to be processed. The implication was clear. If humans could do this with mining equipment and cargo handlers, then their actual military capabilities must be beyond measurement. Fear transformed into panic as species across the galaxy began to understand what they were facing. The humans had apparently solved every technical challenge of space warfare by accident while trying to survive their journey between stars. Their defensive response to a pirate attack had demonstrated capabilities that no existing military force could match. The political response was immediate and predictable. The Corvani faction within the Veltari Confederacy demanded immediate military action before humanity could establish a foothold in their territory. The hegemony began mobilizing their battle fleets for possible preemptive strikes. The Trade Council started discussing economic sanctions and defensive alliances. Dr. Basu monitored the galactic communications networks and reported the growing panic to Captain Lee Hyan. The linguistic analysis showed that multiple species were using terms that translated as existential threat and galactic menace and unstoppable force. The peaceful mining colony defense that had seemed so routine to the Bekdu crew was being interpreted as a demonstration of genocidal capability. Engineer Yoon Tae tried to explain the technical reality to anyone who would listen. The systems that had destroyed the pirate fleet were standard industrial equipment. Every human ship carried similar capabilities because survival in space required the ability to build and repair and defend yourself. What looked like military preparation was actually just the minimum equipment needed for long-term space travel. But the explanations fell on deaf ears because the galactic community had no reference point for understanding humanity's approach to technology. Species that built beautiful specialized ships could not comprehend the human philosophy of making everything serve multiple purposes. What humans saw as efficiency looked like aggressive preparation for total war. The situation reached a crisis point when the Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss the human threat. Representatives from 43 different species gathered to debate whether humanity should be contained or destroyed before they could spread their dangerous technology to other systems. The vote was scheduled for the following day. Captain Lee Hyan faced a choice that would determine humanity's future among the stars. He could retreat to the edge of the system and try to find another home somewhere else in the galaxy. Or he could stay and try to convince 43 different species that humans were refugees seeking peace rather than conquerors preparing for war. The monster ship that carried humanity's dreams continued its slow orbit around the Veltari system, while the galaxy debated whether its crew deserved a chance to explain themselves or should be destroyed as a threat to galactic peace. First Contact had become a trial where humanity was guilty until proven innocent, and the evidence against them was their own success at surviving the impossible journey between stars. Xenobiologist Dr. Jung-eun prepared for the most important cultural exchange in human history as the first group of Velthari scientists prepared to visit the Baekdu. The galaxy had spent weeks debating whether humanity represented an existential threat or a misunderstood refugee population. The only way to find the truth was for brave aliens to see the monster ship from the inside and report what they found. Velthari scientist Kayla volunteered for the mission despite the obvious risks. Her government expected her to find evidence of military preparations and invasion planning aboard the human vessel. The intelligence report suggested that she would discover weapons factories and troop barracks and strategic planning centers. What she actually found challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. The docking bay that received her shuttle was larger than most space stations. But instead of military equipment and combat vehicles, Kayla found herself surrounded by mining equipment and industrial machinery and maintenance robots that were obviously designed for peaceful purposes. The humans who greeted her were scientists and engineers and cultural specialists rather than soldiers preparing for war. Chief Cultural Officer Lee Bin gave the first official tour of the Baekdu to an alien visitor. He had spent weeks preparing presentations that would help the Velthari understand what they were seeing. The challenge was explaining how humanity had accidentally created the most fearsome ship in the galaxy while trying to save their species from extinction. The tour began in the agricultural sections where vast hydroponic farms fed the ship's population. Kayla saw kilometer-long growing bays filled with earth plants that had been modified to grow in artificial environments. The biological diversity was staggering. Humans had brought samples of their entire ecosystem with them on their journey between stars. What looked like food production facilities were actually conservation efforts on an unprecedented scale. Lee Bin explained that humanity had faced a terrible choice when Earth became uninhabitable. They could save a few thousand people on small, fast ships, or they could try to save everyone on one massive vessel. The decision to save everyone had required building something that could sustain millions of people for more than a century of travel. Every system on the ship served that primary purpose. The residential sections revealed the true nature of the Baekdu's population. Kala expected to find military personnel and invasion specialists. Instead, she discovered families and children, and elderly people who had been born during the long journey between stars. Schools where human children learned alongside educational AI systems. Art galleries and theaters and cultural centers that preserved human civilization in miniature. Dr. Jung-eun showed Kala the research laboratories that had been working on medical breakthroughs throughout the journey. Human scientists had spent more than a century developing cures for diseases and improvements to life support systems and solutions to the countless problems of long-term space travel. The medical knowledge that had been freely shared with the Velthari was just a small sample of what humanity had learned during their exile among the stars. The manufacturing sections were what had frightened the galaxy the most. Kayla expected to find weapons production lines and military vehicle assembly areas. What she actually discovered were fabrication systems designed to maintain and repair and replace everything the ship needed to survive. The ability to build defensive drones during combat was just one application of technology that was used daily to keep millions of people alive in the void. Historian Ro-san shared the complete record of Earth's final years and humanity's decision to build the Baekdu. The planet had not been destroyed by war or natural disaster. Earth's sun had begun expanding into a red giant phase earlier than predicted. Humanity had known for centuries that they would eventually need to leave their home world, but the timeline had accelerated beyond their ability to adapt. The historical records showed that humanity had debated many different approaches to survival. Some factions wanted to build multiple smaller ships that could travel faster and reach safety more quickly. Others insisted that splitting up the human population would doom most people to death in the dark between stars. The Baekdu represented humanity's choice to live together or die together. Captain Lee Hyon met with Velthari Admiral Theiss to share the ship's complete operational logs, every system activation and maintenance record and tactical decision from more than a century of travel. The data proved that humanity had never intended to build a weapon. Every fearsome capability had been developed to solve practical problems of survival during the longest journey in galactic history. The point defense systems that looked so threatening had been used thousands of times to destroy meteors and space debris that would have killed everyone aboard. The mining lasers that could cut through enemy ships had been designed to harvest resources from asteroids and comets encountered during their journey. The manufacturing systems that could build war machines were used daily to produce everything, from spare parts to medical equipment. Velthari counselor Nerith studied the cultural data that Dr. Jung-eun had prepared about human civilization. The information revealed a species that had survived multiple near-extinction events on their home world. Plagues and natural disasters and resource shortages that had killed billions of people over the course of human history. Their approach to technology was shaped by the understanding that survival required preparing for every possible threat. The revelation that transformed galactic understanding came when the Velthari learned about human redundancy philosophy. Every critical system on the Baekdu had multiple backups and alternative methods of operation. Humans had learned through bitter experience that single points of failure could destroy entire civilizations. What looked like military overkill was actually just the minimum safety margin that humanity considered acceptable. Kayla transmitted her preliminary report to the Galactic Council with findings that contradicted every intelligence assessment that had been made about human intentions. The monster ship was indeed capable of destroying entire fleets and conquering star systems. But it had been built by refugees who wanted nothing more than to find a new home where they could live in peace with their neighbors. The technical capabilities that had frightened the galaxy were byproducts of humanity's determination to save everyone rather than abandon the weak and elderly and children to certain death. The manufacturing systems that could build unlimited war machines were used to maintain hydroponic farms and life support systems and educational facilities. The weapons that could destroy planets were actually tools for asteroid mining and space construction. The most important discovery was that humanity understood the responsibility that came with their accidental military superiority. The crew of the Baekdu could have demanded territory and tribute from any species in the galaxy. Instead, they had freely shared medical knowledge and offered to help defend Velthari colonies against pirate attacks. Their first instinct when meeting aliens had been to offer assistance rather than demand submission. But not everyone accepted the new understanding of human nature. Corvani War Chief Drac argued that humanity's capabilities made them dangerous, regardless of their stated intentions. A species that could accidentally build the most powerful ship in the galaxy while trying to save refugees was too unpredictable to trust. Their peaceful behavior could change at any moment, and then nothing would be able to stop them. The debate that followed divided the Velthari Confederacy and the broader galactic community. Progressive factions like Counselor Nerith's group wanted to welcome humanity as valuable allies who could help solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. Conservative factions like War Chief Drac's supporters insisted that any species capable of building the Baekdu represented an existential threat that had to be contained or destroyed. The decision would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of galactic civilization. The monster ship that had carried refugees across the dark between stars had become a test of whether different species could overcome fear and suspicion to build something better together. The next few days would show whether understanding could triumph over prejudice or whether first contact would end in tragedy that could have been avoided. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was interrupted by alerts that changed everything. Long-range sensors detected a massive fleet approaching from outside the local galactic arm. Ships that moved in perfect formation and showed biosignatures rather than mechanical construction. The Zarathi swarm had found the Velthari Confederacy, and they were bringing death with them. Fleet Admiral Thais received the sensor data and knew immediately that his forces were facing extinction. The Zarathi were a hive-minded species that consumed entire star systems to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. Their bioships were grown rather than built, and they could adapt to counter any weapon or defense that was used against them. Previous encounters with the swarm had ended with the complete destruction of everything in their path. The Zarathi fleet consisted of thousands of organic vessels that pulsed with alien life, living ships that could heal damage and modify their weapons in real time, breeding vessels that could spawn new attackers during combat. command organisms that coordinated the entire swarm with terrifying intelligence and precision. No known military force had ever successfully defended against a full-scale Zarathi invasion. Captain Lee Hyon received the formal request for assistance from Admiral Tice and did not hesitate for even a moment. The Velthari had shown humanity kindness and understanding despite their initial fears. Now their civilization faced extinction, and the Bekdu was the only force in the system that might be able to help them survive. The political debates about human intentions were about to be settled by human actions. Admiral Cho Isol took command of the Bekdu's defensive systems as the ship moved to intercept the Zarathi advance fleet. This would be the first time that humanity's accidental war machine faced enemies that were designed for nothing but destruction. Everything that had made the galaxy fear the monster ship was about to be tested against the most dangerous predators in known space. The Battle of Three Suns began when the leading edge of the Zarathi swarm encountered the combined fleet of the Velthari Confederacy. The elegant alien ships fought bravely, but their weapons were designed for civilized warfare between species that had rules and limitations. The Zarathi had no rules except consume and expand, and they adapted to every tactic the defenders tried to use against them. Tactical Coordinator Park Jin watched the Velthari fleet being systematically destroyed and realized that humanity's approach to combat would have to be completely different. The Zarathi expected enemies that fought like civilized beings with predictable weapons and standard tactics. They had never encountered a species that treated warfare like an industrial process where overwhelming force was applied with mechanical efficiency. The Bekdu entered weapons range and immediately changed the nature of the battle. Mining lasers that could cut through asteroid rock sliced through Zarathi bioships like they were made of paper. Point defense systems designed to destroy space debris filled the vacuum with defensive fire that organic ships could not adapt to fast enough. Manufacturing bays began producing combat drones in real time while the battle raged around them. Chief Engineer Yoon Tae coordinated systems that had never been used for actual warfare, but proved devastatingly effective against organic enemies. The ship's massive structure allowed it to ram through Zarathi formations, while its modular design meant that damaged sections could be jettisoned without affecting combat capability. Industrial equipment became weapons of mass destruction in ways that no military strategist had ever imagined. The Zarathi swarm tried to adapt to human tactics, but found themselves facing something outside their evolutionary experience. Their bioships were designed to counter energy weapons and projectile attacks and conventional military systems. They had no defense against mining equipment used as assault weapons or cargo handling systems converted to offensive roles or manufacturing capability that could replace losses faster than they could inflict damage. The decisive moment came when Engineer Yoon Tae rerouted power from the habitat sections to create a weapon that no one had ever conceived before. The Bekdu's main drive became a directed energy cannon that focused the output of their fusion reactors into a beam that could destroy capital ships with a single shot. The Zarathi command vessel that had coordinated the entire swarm was vaporized in an instant of nuclear fire. The destruction of their command organism left the Zarathi fleet leaderless and confused. Individual bioships continued fighting, but without central coordination, they became easy targets for the combined human and Velthari forces. The battle that had seemed hopeless became a systematic cleanup operation as the surviving attackers were hunted down and destroyed. Ambassador Song Jia addressed the emergency session of the Galactic Council as news of the victory spread across dozens of star systems. She explained that humanity had not come to the stars as conquerors seeking territory and tribute. They had come as survivors seeking a new home. But their journey had taught them that survival sometimes required the ability to protect others who could not protect themselves. The aftermath of the battle changed everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. The species that had seemed so threatening when they arrived with their monster ship had used their power to save allies rather than conquer enemies. The technical capabilities that had frightened so many civilizations had been deployed in defense of peace rather than in pursuit of war. Captain Lee Hyon met with representatives from multiple species who wanted to understand how humanity had achieved such overwhelming victory against enemies that had destroyed entire civilizations. The answer was simple but profound. Humans had not built the Bekdu to fight wars. They had built it to ensure that their species could survive anything the universe could throw at them. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to offer humanity full membership in the interstellar community. More importantly, they formally requested that the Bayekdu establish permanent station in Velthari space as a guardian against future threats. The monster ship that had once terrified the galaxy was now welcomed as the protector they had never known they needed. Dr. Jung-un established the first permanent cultural exchange program between humans and aliens as scientists from multiple species came to study aboard the Baekdu. What they learned was that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology, but their determination to save everyone rather than abandon the weak. The same philosophy that had built their generation ship also shaped their approach to galactic citizenship. 5 years after first contact, 3 more human generation ships arrived in nearby star systems. The galaxy no longer feared them. They were welcomed as the guardians they had proven themselves to be. Each ship like the Baekdu was a monster designed not for conquest, but for the protection of all sentient life in a dangerous universe. The final irony was that humanity had tried to save only themselves and ended up saving everyone. Their refugee ship had become the foundation for a new age of galactic cooperation, where different species could work together without fear of extinction. The monsters that had awakened from the dark between stars had brought peace rather than war. Captain Lee Hyun stood on the bridge of the Baekdu and watched ships from dozens of different species moving peacefully through the system that humanity now called home. They had come seeking shelter and found purpose. They had built a ship to preserve their own civilization and discovered that their true calling was to protect all civilization. The monster ship that carried humanity's dreams had fulfilled its purpose in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity's monsters had indeed awakened, and the galaxy was safer for it. The greatest weapon ever built had become the greatest force for peace that the stars had ever known.